Hello, I'm William Cheng William, and today I'm going to present about JomGear Grand Games, the creation of a motivating learning environment. So, what are the problems for our university students? Well, firstly, I think they're not able to think and adapt to out-of-the-box situations, and they can only go into a more linear way of thinking. Secondly, I think they are shy and they lack communication skills and interpersonal skills when trying to form groups or work together in groups, as well as making friendships and teamwork in their social networks. Lastly, I feel like they are intrinsically motivated to learning courses because they are using those conventional learning methods which they only study for the sake of passing examinations and not for the sake of learning. In society, games are typically non-gender differentiated, which means that both male and female tend to enjoy playing games, and it is also the main source of entertainment for children and also adolescents, in particular those age groups. They provide motivation towards beating the game because in a game there are goals, and people want to beat those goals and achieve the game's objectives. And lastly, these games, depending on the genre, they inhibit both positive and negative behaviors. So, for example, if you would play a violent game, they might inhibit more negative behaviors such as violent tendencies, but in a positive environment, if the game is more relaxed, more nicely toned in genre, then people will feel more relaxed, more happy, and more intuitive. So, gamification elements. The gamification elements are elements in games that allow for people to really understand and be more deeply into the game's mechanics as well as their learning outcomes. So, for example, of gamification elements, there are achievements in the game which make people want to strive for their objectives. The story plot, which entices them of the world building, the leaderboards, which makes them more competitive in the game field, the challenges, which means that they are not so spoon-fed into the game, rather that they would try to overcome the challenges and press forward into the game's fighting objectives. And lastly, the strategy and creativity of the game, which boosts their out-of-the-box thinking as well as that strategic planning. In Gilgran games, there are many characteristics such as creativity in the game, design, strategic skill. There are also going to be interactive quests that allow for people to select their own choices rather than giving one linear storyline of quests. There's also many games. There are scoreboards, like we said earlier, for competition and level building, so that as the game progresses, it becomes more harder and harder, which gives them more of a challenge. And lastly, communication and dialogue, so that people will start to learn about certain non-player character interaction towards the player itself in the game. So, from there, we'll find out what the research questions. Firstly, can universities grasp the understanding of creative and strategic problem solving from video games? Second, can interpersonal skills be greatly developed from the help of game learning and gamification? And lastly, can game learning and gamification replace the traditional study methods in universities to provide students with intrinsic motivation to learn from the video itself? Well, that's what we intend to succeed in finding the objectives. So for the first one, we want to create a video game which greatly emphasize on creative and strategic problem-solving values. We also want to develop a game where students can be better versed in interpersonal skills so they can make friends and increase their teamwork skills using gamification. And lastly, using gamification as well and game learning, we want to make them intrinsically motivated to study so that they study for the sake of learning and they are more entertained in the learning processes instead of using traditional study methods. So, using the research scope and methodology, our scope is typically university students which are aged around 17 to 24 and has any field related to creativity, strategic problem solving, and communication, which are found in a variety of fields. For our methodology, we'll be using a mixed mode method, which consists of using surveys and interviews, and we'll be using a sequential design for the methodology. In our methodology, we'll also be using Google Forms for the surveys and interviews, where it will be released towards 100 participants for the surveys and around 30 interviews. For the results and findings, we have two examples that have been taken from survey results. For the first one, fun and interesting puzzles, associative and strategic thinking, which has shown that around 90% of the participants have strongly agreed and agreed for this case, which means that puzzles and games can help with out-box thinking and also improve the innovation creativity of students and the players. For the second question, we have asked, games are more motivating way to study than the standard way of studying, which 70.7% of participants have strongly agreed that they rather would have game learning over like a user textbook way of studying. So over here we have our prototyping, which in our image shows the scoreboards, the current details of the students' performance within the game for the first one. Secondly, it shows the selection of the lesson story, shows that the particular lesson they are about to embark on their journey inside of the game. And lastly, one of the prototypes for the game, which shows the movement, dialogue, and the characters, as well as the point system inside of the game. In conclusion, I want to improve students' learning habits by encouraging the students to be more motivated by using game learning instead of the traditional way of studying, because I feel like in the technological advancement that we are pursuing and advancing forward, that games can be a more viable substitute in game learning. There are also limitations for this project, which were the allocated resources and time restraints that were given within the project. And for our future work, we want to see whether VR and AR, augmented reality and virtual reality, can be implemented for game learning implementation in the near future. Therefore, and if you have any questions, we won't mind to listen to them. Thank you and have a nice day.